professions that are very physical, or could be very physical, don't have to be, have to retire from those pretty early. So yeah, we naturally have to move on to something else to keep up.
Yeah.
And I lucked out. I ended up doing something I really enjoyed doing.
Were you a teacher full-time before you
I
came
was-
back as an adjunct?
I
Or
was-
retired, rather?
Yeah, I was full-time. Most of the time I've been teaching.
Sure.
Once they stopped hiring me full-time. I was always hired each year though.
Interesting.
I was never a tenure track,
Yeah.
in a tenure track position where I was guaranteed, etc. I always had to be rehired, and then every year I was refired. You know, I could match, put them on the wall, welcome to, teaching such and such. Sorry you're fired, and don't ever even think that we're going to rehire you ever again.
Yeah.
And then within a week, you get the other, sometimes the same day, the welcome to, because, I'm being hired.
What was the purpose?
Well, they have, kind of a traditional way of hiring a full-time person,
Sure.
which, requires them to post the position,
Sure.
seek people to,
The most qualified. people.
ask to apply for it. As I recall, a typical response to one position might be about 60 or more qualified people
Yeah.
that apply to do that position from all over the place. I mean, it's an open. You don't have to be an American citizen, for
Yeah.
example. And so you end up with really good, individuals, competing for the position. They typically weed it down to like 3
Yep.
through, a committee that goes through it, figures out, okay, these 3 people, literally pay those people to come here
Yeah.
and spend, perhaps a few days, maybe even a week, for the committee to get to know them, for students to meet them and to see how the students react to them and so on. And so you end up with, people with PhDs from really neat places,
Yeah.
who have a specialty by now, because if you're getting your PhD now, you have to zero in on a very particular aspect of philosophy,
Yeah.
biomedical ethics,
Sure.
for example, right? A negative of that is that these are often people that have no clue about the rest of philosophy.
Sure. Two.
Their focus is on, well, if, you're going to use RNA, and you're going to develop this kind of genetic transmutation or whatever, what's going to be the impact on business, on individuals, on the law, but if you ask them, so how would Plato deal with this? They're like, huh? Or Bach,
Yeah.
would Bach write music for this? Yeah. They're narrow, their focus is narrow. And yet the teaching profession really, especially at a college like this, requires, I think, someone who's got a big picture and is working the big picture to try to say, this is interesting.
Yeah.
This ties into this. I mean, pretty much, of course, what I do, actually.
What do you think caused that narrowing?
The profession requires people to get a PhD, and in order to get a PhD, you have to zero in. I mean, one of the most hilarious to me is, one of our English professors did his PhD thesis on the use of food in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
I'm sure you could ask him all sorts of questions about, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and similar literature, right?
Mm.
The food?
Especially the food.
Was it? Yeah, okay, you
Yeah.
mentioned that.
I mean, my question would be, in different translations, do they use different foods?
Yeah.
Because I've discovered that, when you look at Harry Potter books, in French, they eat French food. In Italian, they eat spaghetti.
Sure.
Spaghetti at Hogwarts. They come down to breakfast, and in Russian, they're always eating Russian food.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. That's interesting to me. Why did that happen? Why did they change the names of people and the characters in the book?
Sure. Because it was originally wrote in English, correct?
Yeah. And in fact, I don't know that most Americans realize this, that they actually translated it into American for the first book, for example, in the Harry Potter series in England was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah.
But when they came out with the version for the American audience, they changed it to Harry Potter and the
Sorcerers.
Sorcerer's Stone.
Well, what other Catholics thought it was satanic.
Well,
I know our church
the
did.
answer I saw was that the editor said Americans wouldn't buy a book with philosopher in it, in the title. The Philosopher's Stone. They wouldn't buy it. But to get back to the issue, well, that naturally narrowed the field of, and specialized. So you end up with people not being generalists, but being specialists in a very narrow thing. Whereas, when I first started in '95, our university was a merger of two universities. The one was the Anchorage Community College. And there were two professors in the department from there, both of whom had master's degrees.
Sure. So fight to the death.
Well, and then there was one person from the Anchorage, University of Anchorage, or University of Alaska, Anchorage. And it merged and became the University of Alaska, Anchorage, no comma. And that person was Jim Lischka, who was a PhD. And so you ended up with faculty that ended up needing two different unions.
Sure.
We actually have three unions now. So you have a union for those who have their PhDs and teach 300 level courses and above. And you have a union for those who may have a PhD, but they're teaching 200 level.
Interesting.
Most likely master's degrees. Like I've had the benefit of being in all three unions at one time. Because years ago I taught 300 level courses here. So I was in the one union for that. I couldn't be in the other union because of that. But then when I'm in the other one, I switch and become different unions.
Why have, because I was a union employee for many years, why the three different unions and not a singular union and
The different contracts, they negotiate different types of contracts, different.
Couldn't that
pay.
all be resolved under one union and just have separate contracts? It seems
Follow the money.
a little bit more bureaucratic to me than it needs to be.
It's evolution.
Sure.
How did it become like that? But yeah, so when you think what's an adjunct usually, the years I've been here, there's been more hiring of adjuncts who are temporary. You know, they're just hired for that semester, really.
Yeah.
And they get the least money, usually. Remember the first, the beginning, for one course you would get $1,668 or something like that.
Sure. Next to nothing for your efforts.
Well, and there were no other benefits,
Yeah.
right? So really cheap,
Yeah.
right? But the problem was more and more universities realized, hey, let's save money and not hire, you know, PhDs or, tenure track positions.
Sure.
Because we could save we basically can handle the cost by just hiring the cheapest folks out there. And, you know, of course, a lot of folks who were trying to get into the profession were teaching, maybe, you know, like on the East Coast, I remember reading about one guy who was teaching at 3 different universities as an adjunct in all of them, living out of his car,
Funny.
you know, with all the different books and everything. Just crazy. But at the same time, the view was, well, but that's deteriorating the quality of the university by doing. Plus, and the thing that I of course felt as, you know, I was hired each term or each semester, right? So I was full-time, but I was just hired for the year and then fired at the end of that year,
Yeah.
which resulted in some funny things. I was always a new employee.
Because you renegotiated everything.
Well, I mean, it's pretty much set, you know, but at the same time, yeah, they would hire me each year.
Have you met the new hire? Oh,
And then remind me at the end of the semester, but now you're fired.
Yeah.
So, oh, and by the way, do you mind teaching these courses this semester?
Do you have to clean out your office every time?
No. There's usually not enough time between hiring and firing and hiring. But so they were playing this weekend trying to figure out, you know, how can let's submit our adjunct for and it's not really designed for that. But.
Yeah.
So to business.
I thought this was philosophy.
Well, philosophy has a business. We actually have a syllabus. It's a contract. Between us, right? Which is good, you know, that. There have been professors that have gotten in trouble because they would just come in and talk about whatever the heck they felt like, regardless of what the course was all about. Those were usually Marxists. We haven't covered Marx yet, but we're coming close. We were talking about Hegel. And I guess I've got the setup to go to here. Where it is minus. So, in this particular translation, I think this is the Bailey, but I'm not sure. There's several different translations of the phenomenology of Geist. Notice that phenomenology means the study of phenomena, and the answer that this generation, Hegel especially, gives to Kant's dilemma of how can we know the thing in itself? Kant. How can we know ourself? Kant. How do we know God? Right? You know, three numinous issues for Kant. You can't get outside of our phenomena. Well, Hegel's generation basically answers, well, phenomena is all there is. There's no point in talking outside of phenomena. Everything is phenomena. And if Kant is thinking that, but somehow we know there has to be an object, the thing in itself that we're interacting with, well, that whole conceptual schema is actually part of the phenomena of our consciousness. And so there's no sense in talking about it not being something we're aware of, because we're only aware of it because we're conscious of it, right? And so everything is phenomena. But now this gives us an interesting dilemma, because you feel like you're in charge of your own phenomena. I can control the way I see things. I can decide, for example, I will believe in a Eurocentric model. Europeans are absolutely the best thing in the world. They ought to dominate any other people that they discover. You know, that's clearly something that's happening at that same period in time where they're doing this. You get evolutionary theory like Darwin, which is clearly part of this package, right? And you get the idea that Europeans, Caucasians, like me, says Charles Darwin, are clearly superior beings to